Good evening, everybody. We are back again with our reflections on architecture project, which was, I will immediately say that it was made possible through the financial support of the Slovak Arts Council. And this is, we are very thankful that we can broaden our educational activities in this way. Today we have a very special guest, I would say. Monica said a few hours before, today we will have a real star, you know. So Vasa, you are a big star. You are quite famous here in Slovakia. So we are so happy that you are here with us today. For those who don't know till now, so BEVK PEROVIĆ Architecti is one of the most important Slovenian architecture offices, which is not only locally or regionally active, but active in actually in the whole Europe. They became famous already in 2007 when they've been awarded Emerging Architects with the Mies van der Rohe Award, European Architecture. They are working a lot also for Slovakia. With 2017, if I'm not wrong, they won the competition for a huge housing complex in Južné Mesto in Bratislava. And I discovered recently they have done project, or you have done project for Jasna ski resort, so perhaps you will talk also about this today. But first of all, I would like to congratulate you, because I discovered that you have received the wonderful Plečnik Award for your work of the Islamic Religious and Cultural Center in Ljubljana recently. So congratulations. And okay, I mean, this is all what I can say. The floor is now yours, Vasa. We are very happy to have you here.
Well, good evening, everybody. I know Henrietta for a long time, actually. I checked today. We had lectures parallel in 2014 or something. So just to say that we are getting older. I'm going to share my screen and maybe start talking a little bit about our project. We had a lecture, in fact, in Liberec, if you don't remember. So, well, thanks for inviting me. I think that it's a nice opportunity. I heard that you are doing the whole series of lectures by Slovenian practices. And indeed, Matija and I work, he's actually 5 meters or 10 meters away from me, having another Zoom meeting. We have been working together for quite some years now, unfortunately. Unfortunately, meaning that we are no longer young architects, but we have a practice for practically now more than 20 years. I'm going to start my presentation. I'm not going to show too many projects. I'm going to show just a few projects that I think could be interesting for students. But I'm going to also talk a little bit about the kind of phenomena that we're interested in. What you see in this image is an artwork. It's not it's a work by Birger Andersson, who was an Icelandic artist. And what you see here is called a portrait. And if you read the text, you will see that he kind of, in a very precise way, describes a person. He doesn't give a very precise, let's say, definition of features of that person, but he describes in a way how this person, in a way he describes much more than if you would actually be seeing the person. The reason why Birger Andersson did these works was that he was a child of 2 blind parents. And in order to explain the world to his blind parents, he basically learned the way in which he would condense the explanation of a person or of a situation in such a way that the complete atmosphere would be transferred. And why do I talk about this? Is that as architects we are often, or at least in the last 20 years, facing with another kind of phenomena. We are faced with the phenomena that that architecture is essentially a thing that requires an understanding of an atmosphere and of a place where where architecture happens. But at the same time, in the last 20 years, it is solely communicated through images. So basically, it is exactly through proliferation, of course, of websites that deal with architecture, is that we no longer really try to experience a work of architecture, or have the opportunity even to experience a work of architecture in reality, but we basically see it secondhand. Always see it as a singular image. And this was, and I'm starting with this image because this is an exhibition that we were asked to do with Mattia some years ago in Girona, near Barcelona. And we were asked to do an exhibition which was called Sobre la Técnica, or On Technique. And we wanted to basically put this phenomena forward. What we did in this exhibition, we basically chose 6 images of our projects. And in this, we were not discriminating. We actually chose, on the right-hand side, you see the 3 images of the projects that were actually built. On the left-hand side, you see the project, one of which is built in the meantime, and the other one, which is a render, where we try to actually show that that basically the value of a render, and of course each project was presented with only a single image, that the value of the render is exactly the same like the value of the real photograph, and that today architecture is being circulated through these images in the media, and that exactly what Birger Andersson shows in his previous artwork, the actual atmosphere and the actual meaning of architecture is very often lost. And basically also what we did in this exhibition is that we devised a kind of an algorithm. You see the 6 tables in front, I think 6 tables. We devised a kind of an algorithm which was picking data from our files relating to those projects, so that each of these photographs would be matched by one table with a selection of, I think, 120 or something, photographs or files from our folder relating to that project, randomly selected. Where we try to show to the audience that somehow, for example, this is actually relating to that house that I just showed before, where we try to show that behind this building, which is communicated to a singular image, there is this kind of incredible amount of either technical or legal or whatever kind of data that is hidden behind, in fact, a production of that one particular image from that feed. For example, in the case of this house, that there were this, I hope you see my cursor, that there were this series of thoughts that we had as we were developing the house, that we had all these references, that we were actually sitting on the site, and that even here on the right-hand corner, completely in the lowest right-hand corner, there is an email from a person from Alaska who actually asks us for a project, if we can send him over the project because he would like to build the same thing in Alaska. So in a sense, trying to show that the complexity of the project, which is communicated through a singular image, is much, much, much bigger than this one single image to which we are confined in the media. And of course, on top of that, you asked me to kind of, this is a house on the Croatian coast that we did. And then we actually wrote this short text, which was called The Context, the Concept, Technique, and its Detail, and 6 projects. Where we explain very basically our idea of the context and the concept and the technique and the detail, and how they relate to each other, and how all of them contribute to the idea of producing architecture. Where the work of architecture finally is a kind of relatively complex set of relations in between these technical things and the atmospheric things that we somehow produce with our projects. Of course, I don't know if you see me, you probably don't, but I am much older now. This is at the time, this is me and Mattia at the time when we actually got this Mies van der Rohe Prize for young architects some almost 15 years ago. And this is more or less the atmosphere of our office. At the moment, it's more on the left-hand side because it's totally empty, only Mattia and me sitting and zooming with all the people of the office. But we run a relatively small practice. We are never more than 15 people. We are also never less than 12 people. And we have been working like that in this kind of old abandoned department store already for quite some time. But generally, we run practice for over 20 years now, 22 years. And if I do a kind of a little, let's say, scientific autobiography, In those 22 years, we have changed 5 addresses. We have, and this is data from the beginning of this year, done 317 projects. And when we try to calculate how many people actually worked in the office or for the office, it was pretty difficult. So we abandoned this effort at some point. So in a sense, this goes to say that we have actually been around for quite some time. And these are the 3 iterations of our office in 3 different locations. One is in front of that house that I was just showing before. One is in front of Miss Pavilion, and one is last year in Vienna. Mattia and I are the only constant people, but there are also a few other people that appear on all 3 of these images. And of course, you have an office for 22 years. You have done quite a lot of stuff. Some, of course, a lot of it, out of these 317 projects, only a small amount has actually been built. And we have been, at least for the last 10 or 12 years, working also quite a lot abroad. So, of course, I'm showing you these little stamps because it is very difficult to condense and to decide exactly what are we going to show when you invite us for a lecture like this. So I try to improvise something today, and we'll see if it worked out. Generally, these are the 5 addresses that we have moved around the city of Ljubljana. You also know that Ljubljana is probably not a very large city, smaller than Bratislava, I would say, or maybe approximately the same. I don't know if you calculate Petržalka into Bratislava or not. And these are our projects spread around the city of Ljubljana because somehow still the majority of our work has happened around the city of Ljubljana. You also can see on the right-hand side of the screen that there are points where we have actually practically worked the entire career from 2005 to 2016 in one point, but it's 3 projects, one next to another. And this basically, and starting, of course, from 2001, when we actually constructed the first buildings that we somehow think were our own, which accidentally were also, it was a housing project which was standing adjacent or right next to famous Plečnik church in Šiška. So in a way, Plečnik was, as with many Slovene architects, our destiny and also our immediate neighbor. Over the years, we have constructed quite a lot of houses, and basically private houses were, apart from social housing, bread and butter of our office. We have always used the private housing as some sort of a testing ground to test ideas. On the left-hand side is the residence of the Dutch ambassador, now already some 15 or 20 years old. In the middle is a little house, a wooden house that we have constructed for the engineer who supervises our projects. On the right-hand side is a little hand-polished white pavilion that we have also designed for a friend as an extension to a house. As you can see, I'm following a kind of a timeline trajectory to introduce our office because using very few images, because I think that there are also some years that also relate to a situation all around Europe that are somehow fundamental for the way our office developed. 2005 and 2006, we designed these 3 projects: student housing on the left-hand side for the University of Ljubljana, in the middle, the School of Mathematics or Faculty of Mathematics for the University of Ljubljana, and on the right-hand side, the social housing in Polje, our first social housing. This was the year that somehow marked our, let's say, appearance also a little bit on the scene outside of Slovenia, because for this middle project we got awarded a Miss Madrova Prize for young architects. And the paradoxical situation of that project is that in a way it illustrates a situation which I think is also very common for the situation in Bratislava, for a lot of the Central and Eastern European countries, is that in fact we have constructed the university building on top of a privately owned building. Because of the changes in ownership, the building that used to belong to the university became a private entity. That's the 2 floors below, and our building was actually using the airspace owned by the university from the laws from the 60s. As we progressed through our career, we again used always the small projects and the small houses. On the left-hand side, a house that enters into a dialogue with the landscape. So it's a kind of a little tent on a grass with a kind of a big excavated part, which is a kind of a patio. In the middle is the house very near in central Ljubljana, which consists out of one living room and one bedroom, and is kind of completely closed. And one of our first houses constructed solely out of concrete. And on the right-hand side, a double house, or one half of the double house, that we designed again for an architect friend. Actually, very often we had architects as clients. And then came the year 2008, which probably the same thing happened in Slovakia as well. There was this kind of huge crisis and huge crash, and all of a sudden a lot of offices, a lot of our friends were workless. And this was the point where we started mainly through teaching and afterwards through the projects to kind of spread our wings out of necessity into European territories. The blue dots represent all the places where we taught, and the red dots is the basic development of our projects in the last few years. And based on this, we also ended up designing and building and constructing quite a few projects. These three projects, the left-hand project is a social housing in Antwerp, which it has been finished maybe a month or two months ago, of which I don't have a single photograph except for the photographs of the construction site, so you will have to wait for that one. In the middle is the school, the three university faculties for the University of Zagreb, and on the right-hand side is an Erasmus Hogeschool in Brussels. So it's a University of Brussels. It's a building for pedagogical faculty of the University of Brussels, which has also been finished now in COVID. And I have actually managed to dig 2 or 3 photographs today to just show you, which basically consists out of a red building is the old brewery building, which was a monument in which we had to reconstruct, and the blue building is the addition. You see that away from the street level, very much underground, are the auditoria of the new building. And the idea of this project was to somehow, in a very difficult neighborhood, this is a neighborhood more or less where all of the terrorists in the recent terrorist attacks in Brussels come from, in this kind of very rough and difficult neighborhood, to kind of bring the school, make the school as some sort of a connecting element in between the neighborhood. So in a sense, you see here the cutout of the ground floor of our building, where the cafe of the school becomes the cafe of the neighborhood, and where the complete ground floor of the school is completely open to the street. This was the idea, in fact, from the project, and currently the project is finished. But again, I don't have any pictures. I just kind of sorted a few today to be able to show you at least a little bit. So there is this kind of a big glass base on which the building sits and basically opens up and connects to the neighborhood. There is a joint in between the old construction of the brewery and the new construction of this. In this case, this is a cafe on the left-hand side. We have intervened into this old brewery in the sense that we have cut a series of windows flush with the old facade, and we have tried to preserve as much as possible the atmosphere of the old building rather than making it look like it was constructed yesterday, because in a sense we actually thought that the textural qualities of the brick are much more important than the actual architectural qualities of the building. So in a sense, we have tried to radically intervene while being very respectful of the existing building. And also on the interior, you see here the detail of the interior, also dug out today for the purpose of this lecture, where the old construction of the brewery on top is completely wrapped with a kind of a wooden glove of insulation and windows on the side. So it looks a little bit like this, a kind of a marriage in between the historical project and the historical building and the new construction. And the white panels that you see on the ground are the panels of the cafe, which are going to open up, and hopefully the people are going to sit out once COVID passes through the system. But once you enter the school, the complete school is fully open. You see that the offices and the classrooms where you are supposed to give your text lectures in order to become a teacher are somehow accessible directly as some sort of a continuation of a public space in front of the building. if you go underground, you end up with having this huge auditoria dug 11 meters into the ground. This project took 5 or 6 years to construct, and we wanted to have a kind of a very rough and very rudimentary, in fact, aspect of the project and of also the entire neighborhood kind of condensed into the project. So starting this work outside of Slovenia, out of necessity in 2008, we ended up working quite a lot outside of Slovenia. Let's say the project in the middle, on top in the middle, is a project we are currently constructing in Prague. The project on the left-hand side in the middle is also the little tower that we are constructing a little bit out on the outskirts of Prague. The project on the right-hand side is Old People's Housing, which we are constructing at the moment in Belgium, in Ostende. So, in fact, our office with these 15 people and with a small space also in Antwerp and the small space in Vienna basically works on quite a few projects in Slovenia and, oops, sorry, this was back. Quite a few projects in Slovenia and and abroad. And also we work in Slovakia, but I thought giving a lecture in Bratislava should not be an opportunity to do advertising for Slovakian clients, but maybe more to talk about other projects. And we have also had some publications about our work, and somehow we seem to be very liked by Japanese and by Spanish audiences. So basically, a lot of our stuff has been published there. We have also managed to win some competitions, pretty large competitions in Slovenia. On the left-hand side is a competition for the new National Library, which is the extension of the famous Plečnik Library, which I'm sure Henrietta has been mentioning or talking about, at least in the introduction of this idea of Slovene offices. Then in the middle is the new building for the new National Theatre. So it's a technical building at the back of the National Theatre of Slovenia. And on the right-hand side is a new, it's called the Neue Galerie in Kazematen, which is a construction. We actually won a competition and then constructed at the breakneck speed and opened in 2019, and now it's in use. It's a kind of a construction that maybe I will just show you a little bit. It is in Wiener Neustadt, so it's actually just if you drive from Ljubljana just before you get to Vienna, or if you drive from Bratislava just after Vienna, it's going to be Wiener Neustadt, and it's a corner of a fortress. Again, I hope the cursor is visible on Google Meet. And it's a corner of the old fortress of Matthias Corvinus, which is basically the last defense line of Vienna from the Turks. And in this corner, well, and of course, this corner is bordering on a big city park, which you see is quite a beautiful old kind of city park. And in this corner, there were ammunition storages, medieval ammunition storages, which were constructed in between, let's say, 15th or 16th century and finally all the way until well, late Baroque first, and then of course with some additions in the 19th century and 20th century. And this is the gray thing that you see, and the red, reddish, pinkish thing that you see is basically the mountain which was covering this complete area, because this complete area was sunken under the old park. On the right-hand side, you see our interventions, where we basically proposed to clean up the medieval constructions, to basically establish a kind of exhibition spaces, to provide a kind of an entrance zone which would help where you would enter from the center of the city, and then to provide a kind of a small pavilion and art. It's kind of a Kunsthalle space in the back in the park. So here it's shown in this diagram, because I think diagrams are easier to perceive than the actual plans. That from the city you go into the welcome center, then you go into this underground Kazematen, and then you end up in a kind of a Neue Galerie, or this kind of a Kunsthalle space in the back. And at the breakneck speed, combining it with the archaeologists on site, we won the competition, and basically in over the period of 1.5 or maybe a little bit closer to 2 years, we constructed the entire project. As the old construction was brick and stone, everything that we added ourselves was constructed in concrete. So this is this welcome center, so-called welcome center, the entry hall, and the shop that kind of face the city. So there's this sloping surface that takes you into the building, basically from the level of the city to the level roughly 2 meters underground, or 2.2 meters underground on the level of the old casematem. There is this huge concrete kind of funnel which brings you from the city into this door in the back. This is our office visiting the building when it was opened. So this is a concrete construction with this kind of top light. And as you enter into this huge storage spaces in the back, these were the storages where carriages with horses were entering. So they're actually huge. It's a complete Pyrenean maze, underground maze of this kind of enormous, complete streets covered in underground. Formerly underground, now they become part of the city. So this is a kind of a very large exhibition space. And if you see this ugly lamp in the front, is in fact the device in which we are able to control all the, as you can see, there are no fire alarms, there is nothing on the ceilings of this protected space. So it's all contained in this kind of lamp spaces, in this kind of gray lamp spaces around. So you basically have this Pyrenean space developing under the layer of the city and ending up in this pavilion in the back, which is this Kunsthalle space, with, of course, top lights, which can be used for all different sorts of exhibitions. And if you exit out, you see how the new construction works with a little bit of children's drawing of a kind of a fortress with its top lights against this kind of old fortress of Matthias Corvinus. The back of it. Of course, this is all green now. So if I continue with my little autobiography, these are the 3 projects that we are currently doing in Prague. These are the 2 projects that we are currently developing in Ljubljana, one of which I will show to you today, and then another project which is an apartment building which we are currently actually tomorrow we are submitting the building permission for this tower in Vienna. Of course, basically Vienna is some sort of a natural environment for people working in Ljubljana. And of course, I showed you also the project that we are doing in Zagreb. We're not doing anything in Italy. We did a setup for the Venice Biennial some years ago, but for the Art Biennale. And somehow this circle of 600 kilometers shows you not only the area where our immediate work area, but also the area of the influences that basically have been happening in this region that we inhabit for the last centuries. Slovenia was never independent until 20 years ago, in 1990 when it became independent and seceded from Yugoslavia. But basically the cultural scope of Slovenia covers that. And in this country, of course, some of you must have been here. Of course, it's famous for all this kind of wonderful nature. Of course, Mattia and I never get to see the nature. These are his parents, who are 8 years old. They can walk. We have to sit in the office and work. It has some very good examples of autochthonous architecture, which, of course, is very often used and abused by young architects today as some sort of reference image. But it also has the thing that we just witnessed now, because with Mattia, we just came from a construction site. It has this destruction, which I think is something that we share with Slovaks, or also share with a lot of Europeans. Basically, the dissolution of the original village structures around the cities, which have basically become the bedrooms for the cities and which are completely destroyed urban fabrics. Of course, what we don't share, maybe you would like to share it, but we share maybe this more with Finland. There is this architect, Jože Plečnik, who is basically so embedded in the idea of Slovene culture, and this is the National Library of Slovenia, constructed by Jože Plečnik in between the 2 wars, or finished just before the Second World War, where he's like a national hero. He's basically national culture of Slovenia is built around the character of an architect, which is very rare. Maybe in Finland with Aalto, you have a similar case of kind of national self-recognition through work of a single architect, and that happens in Slovenia. And talking about Plečnik, maybe this is the most interesting project of Plečnik's for me and Matija, because it's a very minor building. It's a building which is on the cemetery in Žale, which is a building where they make the caskets, where they make the boxes for dead people. They dry the wood on the upper level, and the lower level are the workshops. But I think for us, this construction, if you want, because it's not it's a building but also construction, is fantastic in a way that it shows the complexity of Plečnik, the kind of enormous range of influences that somehow he managed to put together into a kind of a synthetic mode of expression, which is something that very often today we somehow forget, and we only take bits and pieces of Plečnik. Here you see everything at the bottom from maybe you could almost say, oh yeah, I'm recognizing Northern European influences, or it could be a piece of Leverence at the bottom, but also a piece of Knossos on top, or a piece of Orthodox churches with the saints supporting the roof. Of course, Slovenia also had modernism, which I'm sure you were aware of. This was a student of Plečnik, but also a student of Corbusier, Edward Ravnikar, who constructed and who was a teacher also in our school, who constructed quite a few buildings. This building was supposed to be the headquarters for the Communist Party of Slovenia. It became a headquarters for the Slovene Bank, which in turn became a Belgian bank after that. In a sense, these two buildings were also the background for the moment where Slovenia acceded its European Union some, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. So in a sense, maybe a good reminder that architecture, whatever we do today, is something that remains regardless of the political and social systems that happen around. And of course, I think all of the architects coming from Slovenia will show you this image, this little roof, which basically was the embodiment of what is much later going to be called critical regionalism. It is a project by Otto Njugovec, covering the archaeological excavations, which is a kind of romantic also vision of the direction in which maybe Slovene architects like to see themselves going. But I have to remind you that also this building just a few years ago looked something like this. So in a sense, despite the fact that Henrietta was claiming that Slovene architecture has a lot of international success and very good reception, we basically face the same problems very often, just as all the others, just as you do in Slovakia. And then this Parmigianino image is something that in fact hangs above Matthias at my desk, a copy of it, not the original, but is something that we kind of continuously put forward as our idea of architecture. Architecture, as you can see, there is this biblical event, of course, happening in front of us, but there is this roof in the back, or somehow roof which frames this event. So I think that essentially this is how we see the work that we do. It's basically just a frame for life to happen. So in a sense, it's senseless and meaningless without this actual thing happening in front of it or in it. As an object, it's valueless. So in order to illustrate maybe this idea of architecture as frame for life, at least a little bit, I decided to just ask a few questions. As I said before, we had architects as clients quite a few times, but in the time of the crisis, we also became our own clients. So with Matija and another friend of ours today, who is also a teacher in the School of Architecture, we designed our own house, or our own, if you want, common project. So a building with 3 apartments, which is on the riverbank of Ljubljanica, of the river that runs through Ljubljana. We demolished an old villa in which today the friend of ours was living. Of course, this is a project that took us for financial and economic reasons, but also for legal reasons. It took us practically, I think, a decade to design, get permissions, and build. In the neighborhood of Ljubljana, which is basically in the 1930s became a neighborhood where a lot of professors from the university made their own little villas. Of course, over time, this has been swapped for the larger constructions. And this is the house that we actually demolished in order to construct our house, because the house was in very, very bad condition. So it was not a big issue to get the permission to demolish. It was more an issue to get the decision to construct what we constructed. But we were actually referring to this kind of example. This is France Tomažić, a very beautiful small villa, which is just behind our house, constructed in actually exactly the modernist years, 1920, maybe 4 or 5. Maybe I'm lying now. I'm just kind of guessing the year, but I think it was the early modernism, which was constructed for a professor of theology, so for a theologist and his family. This kind of radical example of modernism, which is one of the most beautiful houses in the neighborhood. So our tests for the site were oscillating in between the traditional villa that we actually demolished and the modernist neighbor that was somehow our referential point. These are the just some of the models that we did, and finally we decided to do a project which would be like 3 platforms wrapped in a kind of a structural concrete, so a kind of like 3 tables sitting on its facade. So like 3 apartments, like 3 tables. And in a sense, a very simple organization where the front would be living spaces oriented towards the river, and the back would be the bedroom spaces oriented towards gardens. In a sense, the building would have this kind of external structure. So the structure of this building are the elevator, staircase, and the kind of these 4 short walls / columns, if you want. And this is the floor plan of the apartment. There are no rooms, as you can see. It's just 2 large spaces connected together, including the terrace in it. So this is the apartment of Tadej on the ground floor. He has absolutely 0 walls. This is the apartment that I have on the 1st floor, and as you can see, I have a kind of a separate bedroom from the workspace, and the kind of a space for the guests to sleep, and then the living areas on the front. And Mattia, my partner, on top, he has a kid's bedroom because he has kids. He has a kid's bedroom and his own bedroom on the 2 sides, but as a partition element, we have used this kind of cupboard system that we have somehow devised for this project. And on top, we have a kind of a roof, which was supposed to be a common roof, but now is practically used only by Mattia. So this is let's say a section which shows a little bit the structure. We tried, and of course the render, what we basically, when we started the project, what we really wanted to do and how we explained the project to the contractors, how we want the building to be done in concrete, and this is the reality. You know? Of course, you start from this idea of this kind of perfection of a piece of architecture sitting where you enter from the basement, but of course the reality of the construction site is a bit more like this. So it's trash and garbage and a kind of a huge effort to construct an architectural, let's say, idea or a statement. And this is Mattia inspecting, who is obsessive compulsive disorder. So he is an OCD person of our office. So he's inspecting a concrete wall. We have done experiments in the basement of the building with all different ways of casting the concrete in order to get to the point where we are satisfied. And this is how a lot of these experiments ended. So 5 minutes after Mattia inspected it, it was demolished. So it was a continuous strive of a combination of demolition and construction in order to construct the building. And finally, this was the render, and this is a constructed image. And actually, I quite like to show these things in parallel because they are divided by 6 years of incredible effort and 6 years of kind of daily visits to the construction site to construct something which essentially is rather simple. And then the entrance into the house as rendered and then as actually constructed 6 years later. So in a sense, this, in a way, a bit ridiculous effort of us as architects to kind of produce that image, but at the same time also produce the atmosphere of the house. And this is the entrance hall or the entrance in of our little house. And this is our garage, which we had to construct because you have to park the cars in the center of the city. And we somehow use it also as an exhibition space. So once a year, we kind of empty it from cars. I don't even have a car. Wash it and maybe make an event or make an exhibition or use it for other things. And these are the apartments. This is my apartment on the second floor. As you can see on the other side of the river, I'm looking at this fantastic Benares, so-called Ljubljana Benares, the beach project of Plečnik, the stepping down towards the water. Of course, I have a few pieces of furniture now in it. It's not that I'm living in this kind of ascetic, completely ascetic place. And the partition walls, as you can see, the gray box is the partition wall in between my bedroom and the workspace on the right-hand side. This is today's apartment. He is a bit more settled at the time because he actually moved into the construction site because he no longer had a rental apartment and had to move in during the construction of the building. And the way the building sits on this kind of plinth, which is equal at the bottom as in the middle on the grass or in the greenery of our garden. Of course, this why am I putting forward all these ideas about the roles that we take as architects? Because I think that we no longer can take a traditional role of an architect as some sort of a space maker and form maker and form giver. I think that we have to take, of course, the work of the architect has become in a way simpler and in a way much more complex over the last decades. We are just heads of the team of much more complex teams, and we also have to have kind of vast amounts of knowledge about very, very many things. Of course, this, or let's say a little amount of knowledge and a little amount of opinion about very many things, which becomes a vast amount of knowledge to plan with. Some years ago, now already 7 or 8 years ago, this is a project that we are currently developing in the office. We were commissioned to, or we won a very big international competition to construct an extension of the National Library of Plečnik. And the National Library, as you can see here, is a building which somehow defines the image of Ljubljana, but also defines the national identity of Slovenes, and has these incredible spaces inside, has these incredible windows to the reading room, to the famous reading room, which develops in a kind of a, well, I'm not going to explain now how the building is organized, but in a sense, this kind of monumental space of the reading room, which combines in a perfect way the idea of kind of domesticity and institutional space in a kind of a fantastically refined way. And then the location, oh, sorry, I didn't show that. Well, it will become obvious. And then the location, which is 100 meters away, which is basically completely covered by archaeological excavations. Here you see a picture of archaeological excavations on the site of the new library. So it's a Roman city of Emona, which is basically under the entire center of the city of Ljubljana. So basically the moment you dig is the moment you are going to find a piece of Rome underneath your feet. So in a way, it becomes very difficult to construct in this kind of situation. Another fact, which is very important, so basically this is the library, the old library. This is the rector's palace. And all of these pink buildings, including the right-hand side here, this one is a School of Architecture. All of these pink buildings are university buildings. So the library is supposed to become, supposed to happen on this corner here, with the missing corner. And you see that the way that university is distributed around the city of Ljubljana, it's a bit like confetti around the city. So the university campus is basically the city itself. And this is also very important for Ljubljana because this is what makes the city still alive. Because if you would move the students, as there are some now attempts by the university to move the students outside of the center of the city, you would basically have a dead city in the middle. So we were faced with this geometry of a 19th century city and then the geometry of a Roman city, which are similar but just slightly different from each other. You see actually the crossroads of Cardo and Decumanus in the space of where we were supposed to construct a new library. And here you see how our library sits on the corner, and then on the right-hand side on top, you see Plečnik's library and Plečnik's reading room, which is more or less exactly the same space as the reading room that we have constructed that we have proposed afterwards. What we proposed to the city was not to make a museum of archaeological excavations underneath the new library, but basically to start a new library underground. So to start with the 2 squares, so not to have a defined city block, to start with the 2 squares, which bring you down into the level -1, which would be the level of the Roman city, and to basically install the programs of the library into the remains of the Roman city, and of course then construct the entire new building around this idea of Cardo and Decumanus, and around the geometry, around, let's say, the clashing between the geometry of the Roman city and the geometry of the 19th and 20th century Ljubljana. So this is what it more or less looks like. This is the new basement, Cardo and Decumanus, and basically the square that kind of folds down and enters into Cardo, and the Decumanus becomes the main reading room of the new library. So that basically we inserted the concrete walls and the concrete foundations in between the Roman excavations, so they will be completely preserved in situ, and they define the geometry of the new library space. This raises a lot of issues because, of course, the building follows the regulation of the 19th century Ljubljana, while the internal structure of the building and organizational structure of the building follows the Roman grid. And those 2 grids create a building which has the kind of dynamics which are very difficult to reproduce, or let's say if you wanted to design them, it would be impossible to design. Here, a typical floor with the kind of reading rooms and library spaces. And here, the section. So, of course, the top floors are the storage spaces, because, of course, you can't dig under archaeology to store the books. And now we are canceling these floors and the technical facilities. And basically, you see how the light will come down into this very vast new reading room, which is no longer formally defined as Plečnik, although it's exactly the same dimension, but is more a kind of a complex, a bit Pyrenean space. We were actually interested in this work when we were working on this competition. This is a work of Rachel Whiteread, a British sculptor, who basically casts the space in between the books and in between the bookshelves. So these are the plaster casts of the spaces in between the bookshelves and in between the books. And in a sense, we thought that our project is much more relating to this, that somehow the idea that the space in between the books would be the space inhabited by the library. And of course, structurally, this is a photograph of Plečnik's construction site, where he was, instead of stone, using very often concrete for economic reasons, because it was not possible to make these constructions in stone. So he used the concrete as some sort of poor man's stone replacement. And the new library, which is in fact a very repetitive construction of a wall/columns, a series of columns which are going to basically, one next to another, define the structure of the library, fall somewhere down in between the Roman excavations, and also define the facade of the new library, or define the new kind of window structure of the library. So in a sense, this very dense forest of columns, which create walls and create windows, is going to be at the same time the only structure of the whole building, apart from the two structural cores, and also the facade of the new building. By diving underground into Cardo, you will actually become part of the Roman city, but also part of the 21st century city. So coming from two different sides, you will always identify this big reading room similar to the identification of Plečnik's reading room. And here on this image, you see basically how the two buildings are going to relate to each other. This project is now, of course, what I'm showing you is one of the earlier phases. This project is now in the final phases of design, but of course, especially due to COVID crisis, I don't know if the government will have money to construct it. Architect as temporary locals. This is basically the condition that we have since 2008, when we started working outside of Slovenia. We are never really local. We always try to assume and try to understand and try to try to, let's say, have a reading of the locality, of the local either context or understanding of the local place in order to construct every single project. And this is a kind of a continuous amateur-like situation where you basically are stressed and faced with a situation that you haven't seen before. This is a project that we are currently developing in Vienna. The area is in light pink and the dark reddish dot is where our project sits. It's a Nordbahnhof area of Vienna, where we are constructing this tower here in the middle. So this is an urban plan, which was won by VLST, a Viennese office, where they proposed to, in the area of the former Nordbahnhof, was the former railway station for goods, not for passengers. Now very near Prater or very near central Vienna. And these architects proposed to construct a kind of a very dense neighborhood of kind of towers in order to release as much as possible open space for this kind of pink color, which is a kind of a big natural park which is going to surround this entire neighborhood. And then there was a competition for one of these towers, this tower, which it's called the Snow White, Schneewittchen. So we designed the Snow White, and then there are also however many dwarfs were in the book. I don't know, 7 or 8 or however many dwarfs are the towers on the other side of the railway tracks. So we won this. This was a big international competition, and we won it a year and a half ago. This was the urban planners, let's say, idea of how the tower could look like, and this was part of our presentation for this competition. We just try to how do you make a tower, let's say, contextual? It's very difficult. On the left-hand side, you see a kind of a typical office tower of US. And on the right-hand side, you see the view, possible view from that tower. So we basically wanted to move away from this idea of a generic tower appearance in the city and to make a tower, let's say, adjust the tower to the right-hand side image, to the kind of views that it has over the city. So in a sense, we try to see where the views of this tower, because it's going to be the tallest or one of the tallest towers, habitation towers or apartment towers in the city of Vienna. We try to, let's say, identify the important views which are going to be somehow possible from different heights of this building as you go up the apartment building. And we try, and we try to give the form to this kind of irregular diamond-like form of the site. We try to give a form to our tower, which follows this diamond idea, but basically gets oriented towards particular points in the city landscape. And this, in retrospect, gives you the possibility to, so you see the cuts in the middle, gives you the possibility to kind of give shape to this tower, which would render it less intrusive, in our opinion. So in a sense, we wanted to have a tower because, of course, habitation towers, as you know, are normally very fat. Even if it's 100 meters tall, it's still going to be a relatively fat building. So we wanted to have a tower which has these different facades, the way we make the cuts towards the views. So, for example, this Stephansdom view will be of this very large pink, in this case, in the diagram facade, which will be different from the general facade of the building. So this would be the idea of terraces facing and domestic facades, what we later called the domestic facades, facing this kind of a big, let's say, views of the city of Vienna, and somehow diminishing the volume of the entire building. And this is the actual competition model as we were making it. You see the form of the building, and you see the form of different facades that come together to make this building. The shape of the building, which of course, with some sort of public amenities on the ground floor, with some sort of shops and offices and bicycles and whatever. The second floor, where you have some sort of the pink stuff, is the common spaces of the entire building. As you go up, you start cutting the building, more common spaces, and every time you cut the building, you get some more common space, and the floor plan becomes smaller as you go towards the top. And this results in in a series of very, very specific apartment typologies. Of course, in general, they're very simple, but they are also very complex as you progress up the verticality of the tower, in the sense giving also a lot of diversity, because the whole building is, I think, around 230 apartments. And this is the way in which, of course, we combine these two different aspects. One aspect of this kind of domesticity that is hidden in this tower, and the other aspect of this kind of brutal, rudimentary aspect of the tower, which is reflected in this kind of metal repetitive facade of exactly the same openings. Every time you have a living room in the tower structure where you have these big cuts, you also have these big arched windows, which are, at that time when we won the competition, we wanted to construct them in wood, and we wanted to have these very large wooden arches, let's say projecting the domestic space hidden somewhere within the tower towards the views of the city. And if you turn around the building, the fact that we are changing these facades is also going to make the building look more elegant and more slim overall. So in a sense, you're not going to be so much aware of this massiveness of the entire building, because it's going to be materially broken into two. So that here you see how these two different facades somehow come together around this domestic facade, which is basically a series of glass houses. Of course, the wood is now becoming a huge problem because of the fire regulations. So this is still a theme which is very much under discussion. The metal parts were also under discussion because the client thinks that it makes the building looks very poor. But I think that we have gotten to a point where we are going to construct the building more or less with this proposed image as it is. So if you turn around, this is the tower. We are not designing this lower building, is designed by VLST, by the urban office that won the urban competition. They got that commission, and we are working together on basically the entire project. With this kind of a strange, let's say, site-specific or view-specific tower that we are trying to construct. Which brings me to another, and maybe, I think maybe a final project for today. Another project that basically Henrietta was mentioned before, architect as permanent amateur as a subject. It has to do a little bit with what I was saying before, that we need to know a lot of things, a little about a lot of things. And this puts us in a situation where our permanent amateur, which you can see as a positive or as a negative thing. We try to see it as a positive thing because Mattia and I always enter into the project with a kind of very open mind and very research-based mind. And this is a project that somehow took us 6 or 7 years now to construct since we won the competition. I think it looks 7 years since winning the competition. It was a very big international competition for a mosque and Islamic religious and cultural center here in Ljubljana. It's the first mosque in Slovenia, and of course, probably for a long time, it's going to be the only mosque in Slovenia. The Islamic community has been trying to build a mosque for already 40 or 50 years. Well, when we started design, it was 40 years. Now, when we finished the building, it's almost half a century. And they were always refused for different reasons, even in the socialist times. And finally, they have managed with the mayor of the city, who is in a way progressive, to kind of obtain a plot of land very near the center of the city, but in a kind of a no man's land. You can see it here. It's an industrial area which is still going to be constructed in the future, stuck in between the railways. But of course, this is the center of the city of Ljubljana, so in a sense very near the center, but also as some sort of an alienated island stuck in between leftovers of the infrastructures. And this is our beginning, or let's say a site plan of our project. The project was asking for an office building, an apartment building for all the imams, a little school for the Sunday school for the children, a mosque, religious spaces, sports facilities, restaurant. So a kind of a very complex program with the mosque, of course, as a kind of a central element. And we split the program into separate entities and basically distributed it over this kind of triangular shaped site in order to separate a part which is built and a part which is going to be a new park. And we were somehow mentioning the idea, this is a floor plan, this is a plan of Sarajevo from 19th century, where basically mosques were built as some sort of urban generators. Mahala, so-called area of Mahala, Sarajevo was built around a series of mosques. I think it was 7 or 8 mosques which were constructed in different periods, and then you constructed a mosque in the open land, and then all of a sudden around it there was a kind of accumulation of mahala, so-called mahala, a kind of area where people traded and people lived to be near the mosque. And then we looked also, as complete amateurs, of course, into the most interesting constructions and most interesting religious spaces. This is a Gazi Husrev big mosque in Sarajevo, where we were very much looking into the construction of these kind of circular spaces and circular little domes, especially the ones that you see in front of the main mosque space. And then there was a historical mosque in Slovenia. Somewhere high up in the mountains, there was a mosque which was constructed in 1918 because a lot of Bosnian warriors were fighting in the First World War, and this was a mosque which was constructed then, and of course for a long time, it has disappeared a long time ago, where you see that it's some sort of a merger in between a traditional house at the bottom and the mosque on top. So in a sense, something that kind of already at that time tries to bridge the kind of cultural divide in between the, let's say, Ottoman traditions meeting the European traditions. There was also a Slovene architect who was also, I think, at the time, for a time studying in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, whose name was Dušan Grabrian, who was researching a lot of this Islamic architecture and comparing it very much to Corbusian, to the approach of construction of space of Corbusian modernist projects. So these were all the influences that brought us to construct this kind of new mosque complex as some sort of a center open to the city, but still separate from it, that would somehow invite different another construction to happen around it over time. And of course, this is the space of the. I hope the cursor is visible. This is the space of the mosque. This is the direction of Mecca. Little kindergarten on the ground floor of the building, which is reserved for apartments, a lecture hall on the ground floor of the building, which is on top of office building for the Islamic community, and then a school building, which on the ground floor has a big Islamic library and a small kind of a shop space. And then on the right-hand side, you see this kind of sloping park. In section, you see the park which slopes under the level of the ground, and this is the restaurant. We wanted the restaurant to be a bit separate from the program of the mosque, because we thought it would be very weird to go eating on the square of the mosque, to go eating kebabs. And then, of course, we placed the minaret as the symbol of the mosque, as a separate entity next to the mosque, because the height which was allowed by the city was only 40 meters, and we thought that if we would attach it to a building, it would look too much like a chimney. So this was the render where we proposed some sort of a combination of this ornamental structure, which would simultaneously be the structure. On the smaller buildings, it's only really ornamental because it's really a sun protection. But on the big building, it's also a structural element, which would a big ornament which would support the entire building, and the series of buildings which would somehow create this kind of open and closed situation. This was what we thought we were going to construct when we won the competition. So a very large exoskeleton, which inside holds the glass elevation of the building, so that basically the interior of the mosque feels like a plaza, because the whole situation is reversed. You have the facade, the glass facade, which faces the interior. And then there was this idea that we're going to suspend a textile or a silk dome inside this mosque. In a sense, we wanted the most important element of the mosque to be the lightest element of the mosque. There are tons and tons of construction material, but the weight of this textile is maybe only 65 kilos or something. And of course, there is a structure for it, which is around another 600 or 700 kilos. So in a sense, we wanted the lightest, the most prominent element of the mosque to be the lightest. One thing is a very long association of Islam with textile. Of course, you know Kaaba. If you look at Kaaba, it is dressed every year in this kind of a big black dress for the holidays. But also on the left-hand side, you see the miniatures of portable mosques that the Persian warriors were carrying across Eurasia as they were doing their invasions in the 14th and 15th century. And on the right-hand side, you see a work of a Korean artist, Do Ho-soo, who basically constructs all these spaces of his home in the textile. So all of these were kind of influences where we actually were trying, this is also random from the competition, to produce this kind of ethereal atmosphere of something incredibly light floating above the space within this construction. Of course, these are now the construction details of the actual construction. They were, of course, in this process, quite a lot of compromises. The structure of the exterior of the building was changed radically. And again, there is this process, as you can see, that we started constructing this, something that we thought was supposed or aiming to become sublime in the middle of the super industrial neighborhood in all this dirt and shit of the industrial city. Where slowly over time, with a lot of tryouts, this is Mattia and Andrei, who was running this building site, inspecting the elements for constructing the facade. This is the actual interior of the mosque, while the roof of the mosque is being constructed and then slowly removed with the little domes, as you can see, on top. And then this is the final image before the actual cupola came into the building. So we actually combined a series of little small cupolas which hang from the ceiling. They're around 3.5 meters in diameter, and they are real cupolas, even though they look very flat here. They're a kind of combination acoustic element, but also a cupola which sits on top of the large textile cupola which sits at the bottom. The glass facade and the exterior skeleton of the facade, which basically projects itself towards the interior of the building. And this is the construction, the plan. As you can see, that this little pristine white construction is sitting in between still all of this. The top right-hand side is the former railway depot, which is now a railway museum, which we might get to renovate because the National Theatre might move there during the reconstruction. On the right-hand side, you see the triangular park, which is planted with plants from Koran, and which kind of slopes down towards the restaurant as you approach the whole complex. And then as you see the restaurant opening up from the let's say in this triangular park sloping down and towards the restaurant space. I did not, these are the pictures that we got from different offices. This is an architectural office from Austria visiting the project just before it was finished, and it was a wonderful white day. So I think the photographs are fantastic because the whole project gets basically joins the sky with its whiteness. And I think that maybe in the best way to somehow explain this is of course the plaza where all the doors of the mosque can open towards the plaza, and the size of this paving of the floor is the size of the prayer rug of the so that in the summer months you can actually pray in the interior of the mosque, but you can also exit towards the exterior. And then this is the school and the library building, with the rest of the square, as you can see, paved with this prefabricated terrazzo circular elements, because the square is such an irregular shape that only the circle is the only form that can actually somehow fill in this irregularity of the shape of the entire complex. It is in use today. It has not been officially opened, but it is already in use for 6 months by the community. But the Emir of Oman, Emir of I think of Oman, who actually has paid for it, still has to come and officially open the project. I have a very short 2-minute movie that I'm going to show you, and I think basically it explains maybe in the best way the atmosphere and the way in which building works today. It has sound. I'm going to let you hear. not to render actual space. So this is the view of the mosque from my old apartment. This is where I used to live, just across the street and across for the railways from the construction of the mosque. So actually there was this possibility to take the picture from my old apartment of the mosque as it appears in the landscape of the city and as it appears in the night. So in a sense, what I try to show you today is basically just a few projects or a kind of a short autobiographical note of our office, but always still referring back to the original image where basically what we try to construct is only a frame for the life to take place. Thank you very much. So I have to stop sharing. Now I don't hear you, Henrietta. Or Monica.
Now you can hear us probably.
Yes, yes.
Can you hear us now?
Sure, sure, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It was very, very inspiring. And then I actually have quite a lot of questions to ask.
Me too.
But first of all, perhaps because this is really something strange for us to see such a huge realization for the Islamic community.
Mm-hmm.
So in the center of Europe, we are not really used to such ambitious investments.
And the commission, actually.
Yes, the commission, actually.
Yes, but there is pretty large Islamic community in Slovenia for a long time, because
Okay. Yeah.
former Yugoslavia, Bosnia, as you know, probably was basically a country with a high percentage of Muslim people, already stemming from the Turkish times, and they were somehow Bosnian people are the Muslims that are also today in Slovenia. So basically, there is pretty high. Slovenia is a very small country, but I think the percentage of Islamic population is okay, not huge, but relatively high. So in that sense, it was a kind of a natural for the countries of former Yugoslavia to also have mosques. For example, Zagreb has a new mosque which has been constructed in some 25 years ago or 20 years ago with the independence of Croatia. And in Belgrade, you have a mosque which is already dating to the 15th century, to the Ottoman times. So in that sense, I think Islam was already in these areas historically present from the 15th century. And today it's present because quite a large percentage of let's say, population is of Bosnian origin.
Yeah, this is completely understandable. We are all quite, not very deep, but a little bit superficially familiar with the history of Yugoslavia and all this religious complexity. But anyway, I mean, there is the project is a very, I would call it perhaps exclusive. So my question would be, how is the attitude of the general not Islamic public in Ljubljana according to this, or being confronted with this kind of wide exclusivity? This is something I would like to know.
I think that basically the acceptance is actually, I think the acceptance is much better than we thought, because there was a huge, let's say, uproar generally against constructing a mosque for already 40 years in Ljubljana. So every time the Islamic community would get a location somewhere to construct a mosque and propose it, there would be a reason, very democratically, let's say, devised reason why not to construct in that area, whether it was prone to flooding, or whether it was too close to the schools, or whether it was little. So for basically, there was a continuous lack of acceptance of the community for 40 years. And then with the relatively liberal mayor that we currently have in Ljubljana already for the last 10 or 15 years, in fact, they were able to finally get the location, which of course was somehow acceptable because it was this industrial or post-industrial area. And there was, again, a huge uproar against the idea of having an Islamic center in the middle of Europe, Christian Europe. No? But I think that now with the construction, of course, there was a fear that it would somehow incite that it would be too much of an Islamic propaganda, that it would bring architecture that does not belong to this area. So in that sense, I think that our relatively very modern look, we had actually more problems with the Islamic community itself when we constructed it than with the general public, I would say. Because you have to understand also that a lot of people that belong to the Islamic community basically come from villages in Bosnia where they know only the traditional formats of mosques. So they were expecting something like their village mosques also here, and our project was not very easily accepted by the Islamic community. In this sense, I think the fact that Mufti, which is the highest, let's say, religious leader of the Islamic community in Slovenia, was a very good translator of actually what we're working on and what our project meant to the people of the community. So in that sense, I think it was quite essential that we found a kind of a very good partner for conversation in the head of the Islamic community, who was able to somehow, I would not say convince, but explain the project and the ambitions of the project to the Islamic community itself. So now they have accepted it really very well, but I think the general public has also accepted it pretty well, because I think that a lot of fears have been dispersed with the actual opening of the center, that it is not some sort of breeding ground for terrorists, at least not yet, and that it is not some sort of a very strange cultural model inserted into the exclusivity of Western world, but that it is something that basically should coexist with all the rest of religions that we have in Slovenia. I mean, finally, in 100 meters from our 200 meters area line is the Orthodox Church, and Slovenia is predominantly Catholic. So in that sense, this kind of coexistence of let's say, within Christianity already existed for a long time ago. And if another few hundred meters away from that is a small space of a Ljubljana synagogue. So in that sense, I think that it kind of is a testament to some sort of necessity of openness. I don't think that of openness of the kind of cultural space to European cultural space to other cultures. Now, whether it is exclusive or not, I forgot to say that it's completely constructed out of concrete. So the whole building, everything that you saw of this building was actually white concrete. We deliberately decided to construct the building without stone because the mosques are famously constructed in Saudi Arabia and countries like that in this kind of white, super pure stone. And we actually thought that we should move away from the construction, the idea of construction and cladding, but we should basically construct the building out of the material that is essentially simultaneously construction material, but also the final, let's say, material definition of the building, of the interior of the building. So everything is in white concrete. In that sense, we managed to construct the entire project without a single stone, only with the kind of leftover stones that go into the concrete, but not really without cutting the mountain and transforming the mountain into a wallpaper. So in that sense, we thought whether it is exclusive. I think it may look very exclusive because it kind of looks very, let's say, ambitious and empty and pure, but in reality it functions on a kind of daily basis in a very, very easy way. You know? So it's not intimidating in a sense. It has been, what has been fascinating was the hundreds and hundreds of people that actually come daily to kind of visit it, because it is very open and people are curious and people come and go around. And of course the restaurant, which is at the bottom, which is at the bottom of the park, helps a lot because it is the kind of bridging element. The visitors go there and try Bosnian food and try Bosnian coffee and try Bosnian teas and try all this kind of stuff. So in a sense, that's also a kind of a very good connecting element to the wider community.
Mm-hmm. So probably it has the right kind of exclusivity or the sort of overwhelming feeling that comes with most of the religious buildings, right? That there has to be this wow effect when somebody sees it. But well, thank you, Vasa, for the amazing lecture, and we kindly invite our students to ask the questions because we are very curious, but they are as well, I'm sure. And
are they going to ask questions live?
We will read them for you when there will be some.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And but I have to ask when talking about this last project, because you shown us the different roles of architects, and the last one you named the architect as a permanent amateur, and during the whole time you were talking about the building, I was thinking, what was the amateurism in this? I couldn't find it.
Well, amateur because in this case, Batia and I were faced with a religion that we had no idea about when we drew a first line of the project. Mm-hmm. So basically, we didn't know anything about its history, anything about its, let's say, we were the complete tabula rasas. In that sense, maybe it's for the good or for the worse, but we had to relearn a lot in a very short span of time. So in that sense, what I'm trying to say that what I was trying to say with the title, of course, which more illustrates the idea that as architects, we very often do not know very much about the things that we are facing. And when we face them, we have to be in a kind of, on one hand, very, very fast in kind of trying to understand them, very fast in trying to kind of sublimate them into a kind of a response and hope for the best. So in that sense, it's this amateurism is some sort of an open, it's very well illustrated, in fact, in this particular case with both me and Mattia and people in the office that worked on the project. With basically, we had nobody in the office at the time when we won this competition who was of Islamic origin. So we had to reread everything, you know. Starting from the fact of the kind of the beginning of Islam to the kind of the divisions in between these different Islamic the divisions, architectural divisions in between Ottoman architecture and all the other mosque typologies that existed. So in that sense, the competition was for us the learning process. And then after the competition, when we never thought we were going to win. When we won it, we actually had to start all over again because learn everything. So basically, I wasn't using the Islamic terms from each of these spaces that constructs a mosque. But basically, we had to learn everything about, more or less about everything, and then also to understand the spirituality of it in order to be able to provide some sort of response. It's not only a fact-finding mission, but it's also an attempt to understand the kind of spiritual notions of a religion in order to kind of interpret them with our own words.
That's what I wanted to ask, because it includes not only the typology of mosque, but exactly, you said the whole spirituality that comes with different religions. So
yeah, and this is also, meanwhile, we have a question from our student, one of our students, but I would like to touch this topic regarding the mosque again, because there is a real kind of symbolism that you included in the design, and this was something perhaps that I connect with the word exclusive, because nowadays we are facing the tendency that more or less the space is designed for any religion became without symbols. They are very, very abstract, and in the same time a kind of like a common spaces. Not with any symbolical positions, because of many reasons.
Like they're pure out of this.
They are more or less like like other typologies that you are not sometimes able to recognize that this is really something religious. But on the contrary, you went the opposite way.
Yes.
The building is really full of symbols. And this is extremely interesting, because when you are touching such a typology, which is connected with a word, which is not easy nowadays, and you are putting it in this manner. So this is really something, I would say, pairing it, for example, with new religious buildings done for Islamic culture in Finland or in Paris or anyway. They are mostly very strict, abstract, even like perhaps stores.
Yes. Yes,
So
it's
something different you have done.
They're totally traditional, or they're totally abstract, or in a sense kind of very banal in a way.
As if they were scared of showing their right character or something.
Yeah. It's funny, because for quite a few years, as we were developing the project and starting the construction, we were accused that there was this kind of rift, because, let's say, the Islamic community thought our building was far too modern, no? And we were trying to convince them that our building is far too traditional. So there was this kind of the lack of understanding, or as if we were speaking two different languages, or languages in parallel, where we thought that we were extremely traditional, of course, with the modern or let's say contemporary idiomatic format, let's say, and they thought that we were that it was just far too modern and that nothing really means anything. But now, once it's finished, I think that the acceptance is extreme. First of all, the Islamic community is super proud. All the very simple people that belong to the community, because a lot of construction workers, for example, on our building sites are Bosnian, no? So they actually are able to communicate. However, let's say, if you want exclusive or sublime or elegant it may look, they actually identify with that, with the kind of, let's say, a spiritual layer of the place. So they accept it as theirs. So it's very well inhabited and very well used. Of course, I forgot to say that there is a huge sports hall underground, hidden underground. So that basically it's really all the aspects of the community are contained within that project. So there is a very big library, there is a school, there is a kind of a big sports hall where there are sports events, there is a restaurant, but still there is a spiritual moment. So this is why we kept the restaurant underground, or in a sense hidden from the main square. There is this kind of, let's say, separate layer of the religious space which we wanted to keep, and which we wanted to keep empty, or in a sense exclusive.
Thank you. We could discuss this forever, but let's read the question from our student. So Lucia is asking, thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask more about your statement, architect as a temporary local. Do you prefer to design projects in the environment you know, or in foreign cities all around Europe? I noticed that in international competitions, the foreign studios often actually win. Maybe because they can bring a new, fresh view on the city's problems?
Mm. Well, I don't think so. I think that a lot of cases, at least in former Eastern Europe, I think a lot of competitions are won just also on the basis of this kind of strive for difference, no? So, and very often I'm pretty disappointed with the projects that win in competitions in whatever, Prague or whatever, or maybe even sometimes Bratislava. Because I think that that they fail to somehow grasp. They just bring some sort of innovative, cartoonish innovativeness, without really trying to understand the, let's say, the locality in whatever way. No, not necessarily. I'm not. When I say locality, I'm not thinking of people going around and digging earth and looking at two stones, how the two stones sit, and basing their kind of, or looking at the relatively uninteresting Baroque architecture and saying that this is the starting point. But understanding the spirit of the place is a little bit more than just a physical context. And I think the best, when in the best occasion, it basically happens that the project somehow relates to the space. When I say kind of temporary local, is the fact of our current predicament, and I don't think it only is happening with the architects, although I think it's happening with a lot of architects, is that yes, we work in a much bigger territory than we used to work. It's not, I wouldn't say that we prefer this or we prefer that. We actually liked the idea when following the big crisis, we were more or less forced to start looking for work in other places. But in a sense, we also liked this idea of trying out other places. And we liked the idea of kind of coming somewhere, trying to understand it in your own specific way and coming up with some sort of response. So I think that this temporary local is, of course, on one hand, it's our destiny, because today the world is just shrinking. So we are, I mean, you cannot, there's very few possibilities that you're going to work only in your village. No, I mean, even the people who have built their careers on this are working internationally, like Zumthor, for example, no? Or Ojati, or whatever. I mean, that basically intrinsically are practices that are claiming this rootedness in a place. But I think that it's also the fact of life, and we have to accept it, and this is we have to work with it and the best we can. But I think that in general, Mattia and I were rather interested in trying out other locations and and of course, each of those places has a specificity. It's not only about trying to understand it, but also the whole process of construction is different. For example, the process of construction that we face in Austria, even though it's 1 hour from our office, the start of Austria, 1 hour and 15 minutes, and from your location it's 25 minutes or something. It's basically the whole system of construction is different. The way the projects work is different. The way you apply for building permissions is different. So it's not only facing the actual context, but part of that context is also that the process of construction is also very different. So in that sense, it's a challenge every time. Of course, in Belgium we have a small studio, but we also have an office, and I was also living there and working there, so in a way I know the situation a little bit better. So it was not that difficult. But with Austria, we have a studio in Vienna, and we have one person sitting in Vienna. But for the rest, yes, we have to deal with it from here. So yes, in a sense, if I have to ask the question, this kind of temporary local is also a good situation, because it allows you, it forces you to quickly assess the problems and to have maybe sometimes a very limited view of the problems, which sometimes is better. If you come from the outside, maybe you see a problem from a different dimension than the local people. So in that sense, I think it's like going to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist basically looks at your problems and as an outsider tries to give you an assessment, and normally does it within 1 hour. And you think that your problem is the grandest in the universe, but in fact in 1 hour, a psychiatrist gives you the verdict. In that sense, a temporary local is not so bad sometimes.
When discussing this, the whole world of architecture that is now connected more than ever, it makes me think, because you presented your way of being temporary local as in the project in Vienna as a reaction to the site. So that was your way of being contextual. But what do you think about like being contextual with the society, with the culture somehow? Because that's a way for some architects.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's wrong? Or I must say that me and Henrietta, we were a little bit shocked when we've seen these arches on the facade of the tower. And we're thinking like, do you think that the tower is somehow connected to Vienna and its
The arches have nothing to do. Yes, no, the arches come from a different story. The arches come from this idea, or the discussion that we had in the office, is that whenever you look at the tower, whether it's housing or whatever, it's it never, or in 90% of the cases, it doesn't reveal its inner contents. No, it has some sort of a whatever, a grid or a massive facade or whatever, but it doesn't. It tends never to reveal its inner content. And we wanted to have, that this tower is like a beehive consisting out of 230 apartments, but in fact, it will have this kind of it should have this unifying presence on the outside. So a big P presence. So we said, okay, what would happen if each of the domestic spaces within this tower, once would be revealed and become part of this kind of general view of the building. So in that sense, I think the arch had nothing to do with the historical reference. It's basically a choice of a formal choice to give presence to something that is the contents of the building, which normally is hidden in the case of the skyscrapers.
Well, yes, but this kind of like specification of each unit can be done in so many different ways. And the arch is like, I started to think of the Karl Marx Hof in Vienna, the famous housing projects where the arches come.
This is really interesting because
there are arches in Karl Marx Hof at the entrance.
Yes. So I was like, is that some kind of reference?
I don't think so.
No.
There is also the question of wood, placing the wood on because in Vienna, as we know, there are not that many high-rise buildings in the center of the city, and this is a very, very special place, which is really like center of the center, and one would expect a kind of exclusivity also in the material you use for facades, especially.
And you choose the plywood.
Vienna is a very, how you call it, a posh place. So the Viennese people, they are really, how to say, they're
conservative,
and they prefer quite a luxury materials, etc., etc. And really, you put such a kind of wood on a facade, so. It was really surprising.
Well, we didn't think about that when we decided this, but of course now the wood is becoming the problem, but not for the reasons of, for us the wood was supposed to be the other material, so something that is going to basically indicate the domesticity hidden behind, no? And also the main facade, is actually corrugated aluminum, perforated corrugated aluminum. Of course, it's not visible in the images, but it's basically supposed to be super light and super industrial in a way. So yes, both of those materials don't have the connotation of some sort of exclusivity, but I think that the overall experience could also have this kind of special feeling. This tower is supposed to be the center of this entire project, so because it's the tallest, and it's the Snow White and 7 dwarfs. I think it was 7 dwarfs.
Yes, 7.
In some decades since I was a kid, so I forgot the numbers. 7.
Let's not forget that. 7 drops.
Snow White, and our Snow White is not even white. I think it was our Snow White is silver. But as I said, somehow the wood more or less came from this idea of domesticity. We're not thinking about the exclusivity, but unfortunately, of course, I think that fire regulations are going to eventually kill it, because right at the point where we were supposed to submit the final project, there was a big fire on the wooden tower that is being constructed in Vienna Aspern by this Helen Hart, and from then moment on, the local fire brigade said no way. You know? So basically, at the moment, we are the victims of one fire. But we are thinking of
how it's going to look like in the end. We have another question from a student. So Matusz is asking, what would you say is more important for architecture? The way it participates in the city urbanism, or the way it reflects its independent message, especially when it comes to a specific and important building with significant idea?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I kind of think I understand the question. Basically also shows the difference. I didn't show that much of the housing because we did a lot of housing in our basically main projects that our office did for the 15 years of our first 15 years of our existence were housing projects. A lot of them were social housing projects. When you deal with the housing is somehow 90% of our cities. So it's something that makes the city, and in a sense has to also have a certain amount of let's say a certain amount of modesty, if you want to see it that way, in relation to the city fabric, because by constructing housing we construct the fabric of the city. With public buildings you have a little bit more, of course, at task. You know, it's not. It's of course they're part of the fabric of the city and how they connect to it, but in a sense they also have to assume their own independent presence within the city. So, for example, if you look at this National Library project that we are doing or we're trying to do, we will see what happens. I think this idea of, first of all, for us it was a relation to Plečnik, which was number one, because it's the most important building of Slovene, let's say, national identity, that building, the original library, not our library. Our library is supposed to be the extension of it. But the way we constructed it with this idea of a wall, column and wall, which is very much also something that was obsessing Plečnik, it was something that also at the same time we were thinking about having this kind of incredible presence of this construction in the city. So in a sense, yes, if I understood the question well, I think that with the public buildings you assert some sort of as an architect, when you work on a public building, you assert some sort of a role or some sort of necessity to give it some sort of presence of that program within the city, but also of a kind of special place within the city. And for example, in the case of the library, I think that a lot of people, when we won that competition, quite a lot of people were shocked. I think nobody was really shocked with the way the building is organized, but with the way how, in a way, at first sight, it can look also a bit retro, a bit kind of postmodern, or a bit kind of odd from today's perspective. But we thought it was, well, of course we were afraid when we submitted the competition. We said, well, what did we do? But finally, I think it kind of developed its own logic. And I think this is also very important, that the projects don't, especially the projects for the public buildings, don't try not to belong to this kind of generic language that is surrounding us on a daily basis, but to kind of try to construct some sort of a specificity, which sometimes might also be a little bit unexpectedly odd, or unexpectedly weird, or unexpectedly formal or formalistic, if you want to, but brings in the layer of specificity which is necessary.
Thank you. You actually kind of answered another question that we have from a student, but I will still read it anyway. The question is, would you say architecture should be just a background for the happening, or it should participate more actively. Do you think something like a neutral background in architecture can exist, or is it an obligation for it to be, to not to be neutral?
No, I don't think yes, well, basically architecture is where our lives take place. This is what I was showing, this Parmigianino image, and Parmigianino is not a neutral background. No? It is a construction of something that resembles a kind of a house, a kind of a roof over one's head, and it has a kind of a statement. So I don't think that neutrality is an absolute necessity. And of course, by saying that architecture is a frame for life, and architecture is something where life can take place, is more, when I'm saying that, I'm more trying to remove the crown from us as architects, because we always think that what we do is the most important thing in the universe. No? And every new project that we do is the project that is going to make it or break it, or is going to, like, it means a world to us. And we think that
A revolution.
in the moment when we start looking at our buildings, of course we have to be obsessed with them, but the moment we are able to step out also a little bit and let them be, we realize that they also belong to other people's worlds, and that basically, yes, of course, they mean a lot to us, but in a sense, they're just allowing for other lives to happen. So in that sense, it's also a bit liberating, I think, if you're an architect and if you start thinking about your projects. It doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want, but don't misunderstand me. But if as an architect, you're also able to step out of this obsessive, compulsive situation and say, finally, it has to serve a purpose. It has to basically be just a background from someone's marriage or for someone's love affair. And it's not necessarily the incredible building that I have constructed with a capital I.
That's a beautiful response.
And right now we don't have a question from student, but so I would like to to use the opportunity because well, this is a completely different idea. Several times during your presentation, you referred to Piranesi, and you talked about Piranesian space.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in several connections, and I was wondering why actually you use this reference, because when I'm looking at your architecture, not only what you presented today, but generally, I would say I feel it as more like a Cartesian, very much more about order and not about theoretical disorder, which I have in my mind connected with Piranesi. So how it is with your relation to Piranesi and his idea of space?
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. I would also say that our, if I would try to generalize, I would say that yes, you are right in the sense that it's a more Cartesian understanding of space forming, let's say. No, when I use Piranesian in respect to the historical spaces of those casematen, no? So basically you have these incredible arches which are 9 or 11 meters high, and you basically, when you enter this space, even today, now that we have cleaned it, of course, because it was full of all different kind of constructions added over the centuries, we were actually working with the archaeologists on that side. I think 3 weeks before the opening of the building, we still had archaeological excavations on the site. It was a relatively difficult but productive process. But those spaces were really, I mean, basically you're flipping through Piranesi's notebooks. If you enter those spaces today, but not our spaces. Our spaces are, yes, a Cartesian entrance into the Piranesian world that existed underground, and in that sense, I think it's very evocative. So I used Piranesi in that space. Yes, otherwise I would not use Piranesian reference to.
Yeah, actually, you
also, apart from Plečnik, you know that Piranesi is also related to Slovenia. So
of course. But actually, you have used it also in and when you have been explaining this light-space relations in the library you designed. And on that place, it works.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious how the space.
Library for a very strange project. First of all, we were not sure whether we did right even when we initially designed it. Then we kept on developing it, and we now find a kind of a logic to this project. It was also maybe a little bit archaic attempt, because I didn't really mention, but how we are trying to design this building is basically it's all constructed out of a single piece of concrete. So we wanted to construct a ruin to start with. There will be no suspended ceilings. There will be no fire alarms. There will be no lights in the ceilings. There will be. We are trying to basically make this building as pure or as much of a ruin as possible. So the way you would find the Roman ruin today. And we, of course, it's a challenge, because I don't know if it's possible anymore to construct the building without all the amenities of technology that we have built into architecture in the last 100 years. And whether it is still possible to construct a building where all of these things will be there, but will be hidden, no? Will somehow exist. But in a sense, this is a challenge that we are trying, and we will see whether we succeed. But the attempt is to construct a building, a public building. Of course, it's possible with my own weekend house. I can do whatever I want, but the public building without all this burden of technical appliances that come with it. No? So to construct a ruin, outright ruin. So to imagine what it's going to look like in 100 years, and to basically make it the first day.
Thank you. We are actually running a little bit short in time, but there is a last question from a student, which is a perfect question to end.
Yeah, it perfectly fits to what you have just said. Yes.
So the student is asking, what do you think the architecture will look like in the future? Is it gonna somehow come back to its old classical principles, or will it look like a starship?
Cool.
If you can analyze it in 5 minutes.
I can analyze it in 1 minute. I don't know if it will look like a starship, and but I know that you will not be able to construct a starship if you don't know the classical principles. And this is something that I keep on telling my students, that everything we do exists already in the past, in one form or another. I'm not saying that we are repeating the formal languages of the past, but I'm always saying that in a way you have to have a certain amount of knowledge in order to break free. And whether that break free is going to be a spaceship, I'm sure it's not going to be a Zaha kind of spaceship, but it's going to be whether it's going to be a kind of a new format of spaceship, because there are a lot of things that we also have to accept, that the technology is moving forward, that we are able to fabricate things that we were not even able to think of 20 years ago today, no? So in that sense, it might be a kind of a starship, but I'm sure that at least for as an architect, you really have to understand the past in order to be able to see the future. In one way or another. I'm not saying understand the past in a kind of a monkey way of repetitive classical knowledge. I'm just saying that this knowledge has to be in your hands in order to be able to see further afield.
I would plus that. Do we have time for more questions?
I don't know how, it depends, because we of course have several other questions from the side of our students. So I don't know how you feel, Vasa. Are you still able to be with us, or you prefer to?
Oh yes, everybody left.
Everybody left already.
I have a PhD student who is also sitting in the office, and Mattia, who was moving around here, and they both left. So I'm to rent a bike if I want to go home. So I'm here. You can ask whatever you want.
I think that our students are now becoming less shy and more personal, actually, because Natalia is asking, Um, uh, uh, I'd like to ask you if you are very much enjoying to make architecture, or are there some times when you hate it?
Architecture.
Yes. Do you hate architecture sometimes?
I are unfortunately obsessed with architecture. So we basically discuss it all the time. And no, I don't think that's, I mean, yes, we are depressed a lot of time. No? So at the moment I'm projecting an image of somebody who is very relaxed and smiling, but in a sense, the process of making architecture is very frustrating. And very often very frustrating, whether you're facing the Monument Protection Agency, or whether you're facing the bureaucrats in the city hall, or whether you're facing, but so it's it's very often depressive. But I don't think we ever stop thinking about it, because the lucky thing, I think, if you choose to be an architect and if you like that job, is that it kind of combines the hobby and the profession, and it's kind of possible to do it all the time. So in a sense, since 5 years now, I live also in a building that I designed. So I'm faced with a leaking roof, or I'm faced with all the kind of things that actually are of my own, in a way, of my own doing. No, I'm saying that as an architect, I maybe project an image of confidence when I talk, but in fact, we are very unsure of ourselves a lot of times, and very, very depressed and stressed when we work on projects. And I think that the good thing is when you are able to go past it and still not lose focus of what you're actually trying to do. I think this is a big problem also with young architects, but also with old architects, because I can count that Mattia and I are of much older generation, is not to lose focus, not to basically know on the day, on a certain day in the beginning of the process, what you are trying to achieve with that project, apart from giving salaries to people in the office. No? Mm-hmm. And to be able to not forget that throughout the process, which with all its frustrations and depressions and stresses and rules and regulations, basically goes in the 90% of the cases, goes against what you have initially set out to do. So if you try to do that, well, maybe there can be happy moments in the end. And they last for some time, but not even nearly long enough to kind of give you enough satisfaction. So in that sense, yes, I think that a job of an architect is fulfilling enough, and we do it all the time. It's not that I hate architecture, but I hate the processes very often, on a daily basis, I would say.
Yes, I imagine your typical day when you get back home and you are absolutely ruined by all the obstacles and all the bureaucracy and clients, and then you have to remind to yourself, why are you doing it and why do you love it?
Sure. And basically keep track of, also the depressing thing about architecture is that it takes such a long time. No, I mean, from the moment we won the competition for the mosque, which were the drawings that I showed you today in the beginning of the presentation, to the actual construction, it took, I think, 7 years or something. So in this process, you get lost 100 times. I mean, basically in the process of developing a project, you can get lost 100 times, especially with the large projects. And being able to keep track of the initial idea is sometimes quite important.
Yes, there is another question that regards the profession of architect, actually. In the beginning, you mentioned that most of house projects were made for your friends' architects.
Yes.
I would like to ask, are they easier or harder to do?
No, I think the architects are fantastic clients. Because a few of these houses that we designed for architects were very good, because we became the architects out of other people's frustration. So, for example, with this first house that we designed, the husband is the engineer who works for us. He's a structural engineer, but the wife is an architect, and they did 20 versions of the project themselves, and they basically could not decide. They liked them all. So the whole project happened over one Christmas, when on the 25th of December, they told us, listen, we are frustrated. We have done 20 versions and all 20 are okay, but there's nothing wrong with them. But also we don't really think that maybe we have exhausted all the options and we don't know how to go ahead. And can you please try and do one sketch over the Christmas and New Year, and then maybe we'll have some other. We didn't see those 20 versions. No? I mean, basically we only did one sketch, and it was the version 21. And they said, oh, finally, it's much easier with this kind of external judge. So we got a commission. So basically, she decided not to design the house herself. And then also the house that we designed in Prague, which I didn't show today, but is maybe published somewhere in publications also in Slovakia, which is a house which is a kind of little urban design where you have a series of little rooms connected by a common roof, which is the living room. So there is no corridor in the house. That is also commissioned by an architect, where she did not even try to design her own house, but she acted as a fantastic site architect. So basically we could have a fantastic site and execution because we had a colleague on a commissioner site. No? So she did it. She executed the house in a perfect way, but she knew from the beginning that she wanted to have us design the house. So she basically phoned and asked if we could design the house for them. And then also the black house that I showed with the kind of stripes. That also is designed for an architect, and that's also so there are quite a few, as you say. And we like working with architects because they immediately understand what we're trying to do. It's much easier to communicate. And sometimes they can also help with the execution. And sometimes they also know how to follow what we were trying to do, even if we are not on the construction site. Although we are the thing that Mattia and I do and how we maybe manage to construct, let's say, the things the way we do, is also because we are obsessive. We basically are on the building site all the time.
Yeah. I will somehow continue in this idea, and at the same time I will misuse my position and conclude with the final question, because it touches both the architect in a role of collaborator with another architect. In your work, you have done a unique project where you collaborated with, I don't know, 5 or 4 architecture offices from Slovenia. This Vitanje project, I have shown this to our students because this, perhaps you remember, this cultural center for European space technologies, and there were 3 offices which actually take part in our series, yes. But I never asked this question: how it is actually to be in such a team where you have such a strong, big, or not big, but such influential offices as a collaborators, and actually the projects is quite small. I visited it by person, so it's really.
How can so many people bring their ideas to?
Let me put it this way: 90% of the time we are fighting against each other. We also don't share a lot of architectural beliefs. No, we just belong to the same generation, and 90% of the time we are fighting against each other for the same competitions. But this is a very specific instance, I think, and it worked out quite fine, I think, was that basically this happens in 2008 or 2007 or 2008, at the beginning of the crisis, where none of us really have any work. And we are asked by the client, the commissioner, who is an artist, because this whole project is about the culturalization of space. So this is, of course, this building is related to science, but in fact it's also related to culture, because this is the artist who believes that the culture should go into space, that the space is not the space of scientific research, but it's also the space of art, of culture. So he basically did theater performances in zero gravity space, in this kind of Russian testing planes, which kind of drop from the sky and whatever. So this guy got the financing from the European Union to construct this center, and he asked 4 offices if we would do the competition against each other. And we were all without work, and we, in a common discussion around the table, we said, well, okay, how about none of us have work? And whoever wins this competition is anyway going to lose money because it's so poorly paid, because there was the fee so low. It's so poorly paid that we basically, whoever wins is going to lose money. So let's just try for once in our careers to work together. And it worked extremely smooth. And we said, okay, let's try to do the concept together. So the sketch design was done together. And then each of the offices is going to take over the part in which he or she or that office excels. So we did the sketch design together. Office architects did the building permission. The Kleva Gregoric and ours did the detailing. And Sadar Vuga did the kind of overall project supervision. So basically, and we did it separately because we all knew what the common idea is. So basically, we were not discussing with office when they were doing the building permission. They were not discussing with us when we were doing the detailing because they knew, they trusted us that we will do the details properly. And so in that sense, there was the initial phase, which was actually very quick, of the initial design. And then all of these other phases were actually done separately. We did together with the Kleva Gregoric, but they're also very good friends of ours. So for us, it's natural to collaborate. So it was a one-off. I wouldn't say that this is something that that would be possible to repeat on a continuous basis. Although, having said that, we are just now discussing, because now it's going to be 10 years of this building, and 10 years of this weird collaboration that we did, and we are just now, well, it's a secret, but it's also not a secret because we don't know what we are going to do. We are discussing with the same 4 offices that on the 10th anniversary of this building, we would like to do something together, whether it's going to be an exhibition or whether it's going to be another common project, or whether, we don't know yet, but we have had 3 or 4 meetings so far, and we have a meeting tomorrow at 3:30, where we are still trying to come up with the ideas with a few curators together to kind of figure out a way in which we can 10 years later reenact this collaboration probably in a different way.
Oh, that is quite amazing.
This is amazing. And you know what? Next Monday, we have Stella Videčnik here, so we will ask her how it finished.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
You can ask her, although, as I said, it's probably a secret, but you can test her.
We will very secretly ask her.
Okay.
Vasa, we have to thank you so much. We enjoyed this a lot, and our students as well.
Well, the only that we have hoped that you will be with us here in Bratislava, and now will be the time that we go together and drink a cup of wine, and this will not happen.
I'll have my solo wine at home when I get there.
Okay, we have ours as well, so.
It's a pity, I think, but it's also, I think it's kind of funny at the same time, because also this COVID is in a way showing the kind of, or forcing us to be resilient in a different way. I think if we would have been discussing these situations 1 year ago, they would have been completely impossible, no? 1 year ago, our clients in Vienna demanded or expected us to be every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock in a coordination meeting in a Vienna skyscraper, no? I don't know what floor. And now the whole processes are getting transformed. So some things are going to get better. A lot of things are getting worse, like the fact that we don't have personal conversation or communication, or we cannot touch each other again. We had a meeting with our new clients just before this lecture, and we didn't even shake hands. We met them for the first time in our lives. So it's kind of weird when you are kind of trying to get to communicate with people, but I think that there are a lot of things that are a lot of changes, and basically there is a kind of a resilience that is demanded of us in this kind of situations. And yeah, I think we'll learn some new tricks. At least the trick to be in Bratislava simultaneously as being in Ljubljana physically.
Exactly.
Yes, I mean, or 3 months ago, Zoom was, or 9 months. Now it's becoming our new standard. Of course, I think that especially in the teaching, because I also teach in school, I think it's there is a lot of this personal contact missing, and that's obvious in the way that the teaching process works. But yeah, we will see what happens. Anyway, I think that there is still going to be a finite moment where this thing is going to finish and the things will go back to similar situation as before, but maybe with some new additions to our behavior.
Improvements.
Yeah.
The new lessons we took.
The behaviors will change. I mean, now if you watch a movie in the evening, or if you watch a Netflix, because I've seen everything on Netflix, everything that I ever wanted to see and what I didn't want to see, and you see people embracing each other, you realize, oh yes, this was filmed in the fucking 90s, because this was the time when people were actually hugging each other when they met.
Exactly. This is the same as it was with smoking.
Yeah.
Nobody knows anymore. Crazy. Vasa, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being so hospitable. You still owe me this glass of wine.
Of course, yeah, definitely. And some hugs as well.
And thank you to the students for being so patient. I hope we didn't bore you to death.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure not. And we will also give you the physical book out of this series that will include the essays of students reflecting your lecture.
Thank you very much for your time.
A nice evening, and thank you again.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.